Well, hey there, Patty. Thank you so much for joining me today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I'm so excited to hear your story and share it with the community. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you share a little bit more about it, and then we're going to chat.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Shelby. Thanks for having me and giving me the opportunity to share with your community. That's awesome. Um, I have to go way back for my story because my story really did begin when I was a kid. I grew up in an alcoholic family, very dysfunctional. My mother died of alcoholism when I was 16, and my father was also drinking, but he looked good. He was a successful businessman, so he was a successful alcoholic. Is that a yeah? That doesn't really work. Um, an oxymoron, as they say. Um, and so the pain and the trauma was so immense growing up that it is really obvious that I would be drinking and using early on, which I did. I was 13 when I first got drunk, and it really was every single drunk that I had was blackout right from the beginning. And even at 13, 14. I grew up in the 60s and 70s in San Francisco. So there was lots of drugs around, and there was just about anything that we wanted. Everything was available at my high school. And so I was doing speed by the time I was 14. We were all getting high on with weed a lot, and there was a lot of acid around. I mean, I was doing everything. I really went crazy. And once my mother had died, I was just out of control, really out of control. Um, and I, really for pure grace, I was able to make it through 4 years of university and did okay. Academically, I can do all right, and I was able to mask a lot of things and move okay through that world. And then I ended up in Alaska as a bartender. Talk about a kid in the candy shop when I finished my BA, and I really went. I spiraled in Alaska. It was a dangerous place to be during the time of the oil pipeline, and with the fisheries, there was a lot of money, there was a lot of cocaine, and there weren't a lot of women. So it looked really fun on the outside. It was kind of like, yeah, bright and shiny fun, and inside I was killing myself. Um, and then I had a wonderful experience happen with that was truly a God moment, where two things simultaneously happened within the same week. I was teaching at an alternative high school during the day, and I was bartending at night. And um, I got a job offer, a full-time job offer at the alternative high school. I got the opportunity or I had the opportunity to buy a condominium, and they were like no interest loans in Alaska because the oil money at that time was crazy. Um, and that same week, I got a mail aerogram. I don't know if you remember those, but aerogram, a piece of mail, no computers, so mail, from my boyfriend then saying, "Meet me in Bali and let's go travel." And so I literally had this crossroad, and I was drinking and using a lot. So it certainly wasn't this sort of sober meditative moment. But I sat out on a log and looked out at the water and just thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? What do I do? Crying, really feeling crazy. And I heard this very quiet, still voice say, "If you stay here and continue this, you will die. Leave." And I did. So I traveled with my boyfriend then, who's my husband now, and um, we traveled for about 3.5 years through Asia. And when I got back, we were living in Oregon. And I'll try and keep this short because it's a long story. Um, I went to an astrologer and in Oregon, and the astrologer was looking at my chart, and she said, "This is interesting over here. Um, is there addiction in your family? And I said, yeah, my mother died of alcoholism when I was 16. And she said, oh, that's too bad, but that doesn't quite explain this part. And I said, yeah, well, my father's still alive and he still drinks as well, but yeah, but he's okay. And then she said, yeah, but this part here. And I said, well, my sister's actually an alcoholic and in recovery though. And she said, oh, great. And then she just stopped and looked at me and said, Patty, are you an alcoholic? Just like that. And I just burst into tears. And we were moving that day to Arizona. I got in the car and cried for several hours, driving from Oregon to Arizona. And the next day I went to my first AA meeting. Actually, I'd gone to one meeting before with my sister, but I had only gone to support her. So I was only supporting her when she brought me, hoping it would rub off. And I got sober in Tucson, Arizona in 1988, which was 2 days before my 30th birthday. And I was getting sober for all the right reasons. My husband and I had almost separated several times because of my drinking. We had been talking about having kids, and I said I would not be my mother. And so I wanted to be a good, sober mother. And I wanted to do better, to be better. And so I got sober. And um, lots of stories in there, but I will say I was clean and sober for 12 years. We moved to New Zealand, where I am now. And they didn't do recovery the way that we did it in Arizona. And in Arizona, I had a really beautiful, lovely, strong community of women that was amazing. It was, at that point in the 80s, Tucson was the recovery capital of the US, with so many rehab facilities and just so much sobriety. And so we got here and it wasn't the same. There were very, very few women in 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 recovery. And it was still very, very young. It was in its nascent period. And there were, not to be horrible, but there were just a lot of really pedantic, patriarchal, older men in 12 step. And it wasn't my tribe, man. It was not my community. And it didn't take long before I quit going to meetings and didn't have a recovery community. So it wasn't only the meetings, it was the community. That's my story. I needed that connection. I needed community. And so I quit going to meetings, and it wasn't long before I thought, oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. I've read the books. I've done so much therapy, and I know the drill. So I started drinking again. And it was, very controlled at first. I would have a glass of wine occasionally. And I had 2 kids by then, and my kids were in school. That was another piece, is that I had given birth to 2 beautiful boys, raised them. They were now in primary school. And it was like, now what? Like that, my raison d'etre was sort of gone. And all the other mothers got together after school and drank. And so I just sort of slipped into that. And interesting part is I would still read the literature. I would still, say the 3rd step prayer from AA, and I drank doing it. Anyway, to make it's already long, but less long story. I was out in the drinking world for 13 years. And by the grace of God, I didn't kill anybody, and I didn't do anything to destroy myself or my relationships. But finally, in 2014, I just looked in the mirror and said, I don't like you drunk. I don't like you when you're drinking. And so I got sober again. And I got sober on my own at first there wasn't even, Zoom and that stuff yet in 2014. So I was on an email meeting. And when I went back to the States to visit my sister, I'd go to meetings with her. But I was looking for something here, and another God moment. I was in a coffee shop with my son, and this guy walked in that I recognized from meetings way back when here. And a woman walked in next to him, and I thought, oh, she is cool looking. She had this wavy, really cool hair and this flowing clothes. And they sat down with their coffee, and I just got up and I said, I don't know if you remember me. I used to go to meetings with you. And he said, oh, yeah, I remember you, Patty. How are you? It's been a long time. And I said, I'm good. I'm good. But I don't really want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. And I introduced myself to Rosie and said, are you in recovery? And she said, yeah, I am. And I said, I really need a women's meeting. And she said, let's start one. And we started the meeting here, and that was in 2000. And I think by the time we started the meeting, it was 2015. And it's still going strong. So that's my story up to then.
Thank you so much for sharing all that, Patty. I really appreciate it. And, just particularly for the vulnerability and honesty, because that is truly how it works. That's how we're taught. If you do come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or another 12-step fellowship, that's generally what you're going to be taught, that this is how it works, right? We share the message of hope with other people who are sick and suffering, and hopefully it infiltrates their hearts and minds and makes them want to get and stay sober. And that's what I like to do here too. So, so it sounds like you had a long history with your own family of origin, and then also just throughout your own addiction and with your, trying to maintain your marriage and raise kids. And I understand that I have 3 young adult children now too, and I'm also married. And, it's a lot to manage
It
just
is a
as
lot.
a, just regularly, just as a, whatever, regular person. I always say, or I was taught early on, and I got sober in AA as well, and not everybody does, and that's okay. But I was also taught that, um, I totally lost my train of thought. Uh, I don't know.
what I really find so important, there's a my very favorite quote is by Johann Hari. And he wrote Chasing the Scream. I don't know if you know that book, but yeah, he's a really like him. And the quote is, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Right.
And to me, that is just vital information, because that's what happened with me when I got away from people. And I agree with you. Not everybody gets clean and sober in a 12-step program, and that's fine. 12-step absolutely doesn't work for a lot of people. When I came here, it didn't work for me. And that's why I went out again, and I had to find more. And I've found lots of different permutations, which is wonderful. But the essence, the core is that connection. And without that connection, it doesn't work. We don't feel seen. We don't feel supported. And if you don't have it, that support of of being clean, of being sober, if you don't have it in your family, if you don't have it in those closest friends, there isn't that scaffolding for holding you.
Yeah.
And that's essential. And that's what I find in 12-step rooms. Although when Rosie and I started the meetings, we went to NA because we found a lot of the AA just closed-mindedness in our community problematic. And what we wanted, basically, we put it under the flag of NA, but we wanted people to come in with any addiction. That's one of the things that I really struggle with when I was in an AA group, and I'd be talking about using other drugs, and they'd say, oh, no, no, no. If you want to talk about your drug use, you have to go to NA, or you have to go to, one of the other myriad programs. And if you want to talk about your shopping addiction, then you need to go to Debtors Anonymous, or you need to go here. Or if you want to talk about your eating addiction, then you go to OA. And what Rosie and I were talking about is, let's start a program where you can walk in with absolutely any addiction and say, I'm an addict, because that's what it is. We are all addicts looking for something to fill that hole. And it doesn't matter what substance or what behavior you choose. Addiction is addiction is addiction. And we are looking for something to take care of us when we're feeling that insanity.
I might totally agree with that. And, I usually say, what we're trying to do now in long-term recovery, and with all of this, the work that we're doing and learning how to thrive and build emotional sobriety, is we're trying to build and create lives that we don't want to escape from. That is
Exactly.
the blessing that we get to have, when we get and stay sober for a long time, and we show up and do the work like you mentioned. You've had a lot of therapy. I totally get that. I've done a ton of therapy myself. I'm also a mental health therapist, and so I work, kind of directly with the mental health community and the recovery community every single day. But it's an inside job. We have to do that inside work, in order to get the transformation that we're looking for, to thrive in long-term recovery and to
Exactly.
maintain that. I mean, the big book talks about, like, can we maintain sobriety under any and all conditions, and I feel like that is true. Like, this is the acid test. This is the, when those big things come at you, when your husband's like coming at you and you're like, whoa, and like you have a disagreement, or your kid has, gets kicked out of school, or you're hit with a health thing, can we stay sober under any and all conditions? And um yes, we can, when we are filled with the right stuff and we have that community around us. I agree with you. And one of the things that I always find fascinating is when people do come into my world and they're like, "Oh, I tried, AA, it didn't work for me," and blah blah blah. And I get it. Like, I'm not a big, like, 12-step, thumper, or try to convince anybody, but I also do believe that it can work for any and all people,
Yeah.
if we, just open our hearts and minds. But what happens a lot of times is, you have to become willing to, hear the hard stuff, right? Like, you have to be
Yeah.
willing to, like, have somebody, make maybe a judge what you believe is a judgment, but what they're truly trying to do is say, like, hey, this is what we did, and the people who before us came before us did, and this is how we stayed sober. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like they say, we're not here to make friends, we're in the business of saving lives. And I totally agree with that. And so, but what I say to them all the time is, if you're still struggling to stay sober, I would always recommend that you try to go to a 12-step fellowship first, because building a community, like you mentioned, of
Absolutely.
sober people doing sober things is how it works, right? You don't have to like all the principles or everything, the dogma, or even all the people there. Like they say,
Right.
even in the big book says, like, this is the people who would normally not mix. But
Right.
you do need to find a group of people, because generally speaking, for most of us, there we don't have that. We don't have people
Yep.
in our lives that are sober doing sober things. We
Yep.
have people
Exactly.
in our lives who are drinking and doing a lot of
Exactly.
drinking things. And so we need to be around people who can come around us and laugh and be silly and go do fun things without substances. And so the only place in my world so far where you can find that is in 12 step. And in the beginning of your journey, so important. You don't have to stay there forever or keep going, but in the beginning, you need to build up a community around you. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, we're
Exactly.
blessed now, like you mentioned.
Just real quick, I want to add, because if there are people listening
Yeah.
that are saying, I've tried and I haven't felt it. There are a lot of meetings. Go to different meetings, wait until you find your tribe, because you will. You will. And I think, and maybe 12 step isn't for everyone. I totally agree. But there are a lot of 12 step meetings.
Yeah.
So, in NA, your drug of choice was alcohol. Cool. You might find it there, or an all women's meeting, or, an all men's meeting, or whatever it is, finding that group where you resonate, because connection is key.
Yeah, and that could be, now these days we have all of this modern recovery. So we have all of these other kinds of groups now. Like, I have a clinical client in my private practice who, is getting sober, and like she just didn't connect at all with 12 step. And I made some suggestions, and one of them was, She Recovers, and she
Yeah,
joined the She Recovers community, and now she goes to meetings every day there. They are like loving her up. She's feeling it all, like, and I'm like, yes, great. Like,
perfect.
this is amazing. Like, that's wonderful. You found people that you can connect with, where you can be honest and show up and learn
Absolutely.
how to do the things, right? And so that could be like Laura McGowan's, We're the Luckiest, or the Luckiest Club, or Sober Sis, like she's got a whole community too. So there's a variety of ways to do that. Um,
Absolutely.
but what we really want to do is make those tiny micro changes over time. Like, we learn how to follow directions, right? Like, I don't know about you, but for me, when I got sober, my sponsor told me things like, like you need to call me every day. You need to like start getting up at the same time every day. I had to learn to like brush my teeth twice a day and feed myself properly and like not exercise for 3 hours a day. And, like I had to learn how to do proper skincare, like just things that adults do, but
Right.
like I just wasn't really clued into a lot of these life skills,
Right.
and so with these tiny micro changes that we make over time through really healthy habit formation leads to this big transformation. And a lot of that is our thinking patterns and like the way we view ourselves and also others, and how we kind of generally feel in the world, right? And
Yes.
so I don't know how that was for you, but for me, those thinking patterns, and that's what I teach a ton of, like changing and eliminating your negative thinking patterns,
Huge.
because that's where the big transformation is going to come when we start to catch ourselves, when we start to learn, we take an inventory of what our thinking patterns are, and then we learn how to change them into a much more acceptable, like more rational way. Um, we get this big transformation around emotional sobriety.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's massive. And the once we've been sober for a while, and I know that a lot of the things that you talk about in your podcast is about people being sober for a while and then what? That sort of and then what moment. And emotional sobriety is key. First, we have to get clean and sober so the substances and that behavior is out of our body. But then there's a whole life to create. And that's what you're talking about, those sort of micro changes, little bit by little bit, where we learn to embrace ourselves and love ourselves from the inside out. Because, I'm just speaking for myself, but for a lot of women that I've worked with, it's that's the challenge, is learning to love ourselves, because most of us didn't learn to do that, especially those of us raised in dysfunctional families where there wasn't that modeling, there wasn't that mirroring. We didn't get it mirrored back, we didn't get it modeled, we floundered.
Yeah.
And so we learn, I mean, I love what the way that Gabor Mate describes it, that we learn to deal with the trauma of our life by taking care of ourselves. And a lot of us did it through substances, and it worked. It worked really well. We learned to numb ourselves out from extreme pain. So the substance did its job when we were in that pain. We're still alive. We didn't decide to kill ourselves. We didn't decide to annihilate ourselves in one way or another until it got to that point with substances for some of us. But that's the first thing, is okay, that took care of us. But I love what you say is, but the point is to build a life that we don't want to escape from. And so once we have that, our bodies, our minds are clean enough that we're not in the midst of the insanity of the substance, then those little behaviors that we're learning. I love that that your sponsor taught you about skincare and hygiene, the things that seem like, well, duh, but for a lot of us it wasn't duh. We abandoned ourselves. And so after we learn those things and we do get to the point where, okay, I'm here, I'm healthy, and now what? And so really coming into that place of, okay, what's the next piece? How do I thrive in sobriety?
Exactly. And I find that in my experience with the women, hundreds of women that I've kind of encountered through therapy, my therapy practice, and also in coaching and in my course, is that that really starts to happen once we get and stay sober for like close to a year to or more, like that 1 to 5 year mark is when a lot of this gigantic transformation starts to happen, right? Because that's, again, like that's as sober as you're ever going to be. But now, a lot of that early sobriety stuff is being kind of taken care of. If you have legal issues or, family or marital stuff, like a lot of that kind of stuff is starting to really unfold and be taken care of. And then you get to that little bit later time and the fog is completely cleared and you're open minded and open hearted, and like suddenly those desires of your heart are starting to bubble up, and you're being exposed to opportunities, I always say, of things. Maybe you want to start a business or a family or get out of this marriage or get in one or whatever you want, like whatever it is that you desire. Those opportunities are coming up for you and suddenly they seem possible because
Right.
when you were drinking, you're either, you have barstool wishes, you're like, oh, I'm going to run a marathon someday or I'm going to do this or that. And like, none of that's ever going to happen because you're just stuck in your own addiction. And so now, like, you're as sober as you're ever going to be. You've got a little bit of time under your belt. You started to learn how to just do the basic things. And then you're like, okay, well, I want to do this thing or I want to create this thing. So then it's like, well, how do I do that? And so a lot of that, where I find women come is like, I don't have the roadmap for that. Like, I don't know how, because a lot of it revolves around confidence and like self love and like, how do I believe in myself enough and believe that I'm good enough, that I am okay as I am, then to be able to move forward with this dream, right? And so
Exactly.
that takes a lot of vigilance and study and care. And over time, again, we start to increase it. And eventually we do learn how to kind of, like, a lot of it is like recognition of our emotions. Like if you
Yeah.
did grow up in a dysfunctional family where feelings weren't really talked about or nobody really kind of discussed that with you, that can be a huge thing. Like, what are the feeling words, and then like, how does that come up in me? Like, what does anger look like in me or sadness? And then once you start to get, put words to those and then notice like, well, when does that come up? Now you're building like this whole long list of data about yourself, and you're starting to learn. And then it becomes like, okay, well, how do I manage those big emotions, right? So maybe you're parenting, you're a parent too, like you're parenting, and these kids have like big emotions too, like they're coming at you, right? Or they're having a tantrum, or they're teenagers, and you're kind of like, oh my gosh, not only am I trying to manage myself, like how do I stay well under any circumstances, right? But you're also now trying to like not kill that kid or not scream at that child or not
Right.
pick them up and want to be like, okay,
Yeah.
I want to shake you. Like there's, how do I do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if you have any like insight on your work around that, like that emotional regulation piece. That's like, that's where we get to next. Like, okay, well then
Exactly.
how do we begin to manage those emotions?
Exactly. A great question. And that is the essence, isn't it? And I love the fact that, right behind you, it says breathe, because that's the first step in my opinion. I used to run workshops for teenagers, and sort of helping to teach that self-regulation is a huge part. And I have things that work for me that I talk about. But the first one is always pause and breathe, and take a beat. Take a beat. It's not that reaction.
Mhm.
Um, for me, there are, I read a lot, and there are so many experts out there. And so I eat a lot of information as a piece of it. I have an incredibly fast, chaotic brain. And that was one of the first things that I had to deal with, is learning to meditate, learning to get quiet. And to me, that's huge, because that breathe and take a beat. And then when you can, take a few more beats and back up and get quiet enough that there is a piece that you're operating from, instead of operating from chaos. And we don't always have that moment, because if we are dealing with kids and teenagers and there's stuff coming at us, there's not always that moment.
Right.
But to try and find that moment, as long as everybody's safe. Give yourself a timeout so you have a minute to have that moment to breathe, to have that moment where you're not reacting, you're choosing to act. And we do have that choice. We do. Now that we're clean and sober, we have that choice. We are not just, knee jerk reacting to everything anymore.
Mhm.
So that's huge. And as I say to any woman in early sobriety, once you do get clean enough that you've got the capacity, go do your work. Find a therapist that you can work with and start uncovering those layers. Because the thing is, with sobriety, what we know once we're sober for a while is, okay, now my body is clean and free of those chemicals, but the reason I started drinking is still there. That that all that stuff, all that trauma that I pushed down and numbed out, is still there, and I'm feeling it even more because I'm not numbing it out. So the first thing we have to do, everyone, I don't care exactly how you do it, but you got to go do your work. You've got to uncover what's under there and clean it out. Otherwise, we're just putting a Band-Aid on a really dirty wound. We've cleaned out our system, and now we need to uncover some of the reasons that we were drinking or using almost to the point of death to not feel. Because, baby, once you're not drinking and using, you're feeling all of it. And then if you have, family members coming at you, it brings up all that shit that we tried to keep down. So, not, in my opinion, any addict can't raise a kid unless they've done some of their own work, because we repeat patterns. We just do. It's not our
Right.
fault. We're not bad people, but we repeat patterns because that's what we learned. So
Totally agree
my,
with that. Yeah.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think
that,
that's like somebody has to be the cycle breaker, right? And
yeah,
that's one of the other,
absolutely.
it's one of the other blessings of sobriety, right? Is that if you come from a family of two, three, or four siblings or whatever went on, like whatever trickled down to you, like when you do get and clean and sober, like you get the opportunity to be like the one. You get to be the
Yeah,
one in the family. I mean, maybe you're not, but like maybe there's another one, but you get the chance to be like, okay, I'm gonna get up and out. I'm gonna get clean and sober. I'm gonna change my thinking patterns. I'm gonna work on my emotional regulation, become less reactive and more responsive. You said
yeah,
breathe and take a beat. I love that. I always say the three R's: refrain, reflect, and then respond. So like take a minute, like, and also like we learn things in early recovery, like, no is a complete sentence or no response is a response. These are the little tidbits that sound kind of annoying and like
the
sayings, and you're like,
bumper
oh, this is
stickers.
so
Yeah,
stupid. But it's honestly the best, because those are the things that I remember. Those are the little things you can grab onto
absolutely.
and remember and be like, I can just not respond to this. Like, it's
Yeah,
okay if I
yeah,
just take a breath. I can just see the text. I can just walk away. And then you know what? I'm going to give myself a minute or 24 hours or whatever, or maybe consult with someone, maybe pray about it, just sit. And then I might go back in. We get to do that
exactly.
today, and
Absolutely.
we have those choices today, which is the blessing. And, one of the things that we talked, you and I know you're particularly passionate about this too, is, like life comes at you, right? And so I know part of my story, and that I share a lot of the times that, I was working hard, I was doing all the things, and this was earlier on in my recovery journey. It's been kind of a while, but I was doing all the things, was really involved in like in the recovery program and the things, and then slowly started to change a little bit. I mean, I changed for the better a lot, and then I started to change for the worse a little bit because I was just overwhelmed.
Mm,
I was really kind of grasping at straws for like, oh, like how do I manage these children? And my husband's got this big job, and I felt all alone. Like I felt like I was doing it by myself, and I didn't know who I could call. Like it was just, kind of a lot. And slowly I just kind of slipped into myself. I kind of got
mm,
back into those chains of self. And I can see that very clearly now. And the moment I couldn't really see it. And I also could feel that I was like physically almost turning my back on my higher power, my God. And like I know this would help me if I just went to this, but I'm not doing that. I'm not
yeah,
gonna, like I had like a
I'm not
tantrum,
going
like,
to. Yeah.
like forget it. And so like, and then that lasts for, if you let that go for a while, it creates a whole big problem for me. That was like a sober bottom, right? I was like right at
Yep.
the end, kind of back at the end of my drinking. I didn't want to drink or use because I just personally just knew that wasn't going to be an option for me. But I felt the same way, and I
Hmm.
really I wanted that escape. I wanted to get out. And luckily for me, I didn't do that. But I know for you, you experience a lot of women, your experience for sure already. And then other people who do choose to go back out or do choose to relapse. And then, of course, what we know about this disease is nothing is good about that.
No, no.
I'm just curious though, if you could speak to a little bit around, like what you saw in yourself or like other people now that you're further away from it. Like, why does that happen? Like, how do we get to that place? What are we not doing? What are we doing? And then, like, how do we kind of become aware of it and then prevent it?
Exactly. I interviewed a lot of women for my second book, which is called Recovery Road Trip, and I was really interested why women relapse. And I interviewed women from my workshops. I interviewed women after meetings. I got their approval if they were okay. So why women relapsed and why some came back, some didn't. Um, and I think the main thing that I heard really really strongly from all women was about, as I said, connection. They didn't feel connected to people in the same way. For myself, and I'll speak for myself only, although I did hear this echoed a few times, I was arrogant. I was arrogant as fuck. It was like, I've got this. I'm fine. I don't need this, you know. And I didn't feel that connection, and I felt like I can do this. I'm fine. I can drink like a normal person.
Right.
Um, and that arrogance, honestly, was really dangerous. I think it is for all of us. And you mentioned there before it just sort of pulling away from my higher power, like, yeah, 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 yeah. I quit meditating. I still read the literature, but almost like, well, this is just my safety net kind of thing. And so that was a huge piece. I think that there's also a danger with women in that there's, unless we find our tribe, unless we discover something like She Recovers or a group that's working with women, there's so much patriarchy in the old literature that a lot of women get turned off, and it's like, yeah, well, fuck you. I don't need this. I don't want to hear it.
Right.
And I love a lot of things that her name escapes me, who wrote Quit Like a Woman.
Holly Whitaker. Yeah.
Yeah, Holly Whitaker. She has some great information. She's not in 12 step, and that's fine, but she talks about advertising that just is so alluring. She talks about if you look on Facebook and on social media, just how sparkling it looks out there in the drinking and using world. So it's, if we pull away from this community, if we lose that connection, it's easy to get pulled back into those smoke and mirrors. And, that's why I started drinking again. Luckily, there weren't a lot of drugs around and I didn't go down that path. But the people that were sitting on their decks next to the beach, drinking really good wine and having the kids play, it looked so pretty. It looked so pretty. And for a lot of women, it works. For me, it didn't. For me, it didn't. It was way too easy to get sucked right down. But I was arrogant, like, I can do this. I'm smart. I know the rules. I know how it works. I'm good. And just that, I think that also with, other women, it came up in different ways. It was looking for connection, not feeling connected to something outside. A lot of women that I spoke to relapsed again because of partners. A lot of the reasons why a lot of women started using in the first place, their partners were drinking or using a substance. And it was like, I just don't want to fight it anymore. I got clean and sober. I did okay, but I'm too tired.
Yeah, totally. And so it sounds like, like from your research too, there's just a variety of reasons, but really what the thing that stands out to me in the message that I always heard too, like what you will hear if you do go to meetings in whatever forum, if you
Mm,
listen to people, what you'll hear is, generally speaking, they stopped doing the things that were working when they started. And
exactly.
it's just that simple. I mean, I think sometimes we were like, oh, how could it be that simple? It's just not that simple, but it is, because, and it makes perfect sense. If you were doing something that was helping you, if you were showing up at meetings, if you were going to therapy, if you were talking to, a sponsor or other women in your group, reading your book, doing, step work or whatever work is in your program, you're connected all the time. You're in it.
Exactly.
You're in the material. You're right there. But as soon as you kind of start to slip away, oh, I'm not going to get to that one today because of whatever, we can start making other things a priority. And
That's it.
yeah, you're right. Like that's the things, that's the same exact stuff that I used to hear too when I was coming up as well. And I've experienced that myself even since then, even though I haven't picked up a drink or a drug, like I've shared on this podcast many times, I can make myself sick with a lot of other things, mostly food for me. So like I have done that. I've kind of
Mm,
relapsed, but I'd choose Chick-fil-A milkshakes,
right.
and lots of sugar and food as like my obsession and compulsion instead of, a traditional drug or alcohol. And it works the same way, right? It hits those
Yep.
same dopamine receptors. It helps me escape from the feelings, helps me soothe myself, give
Exactly.
myself some kind of comfort or soothing that's completely unhealthy for me,
Yep.
right?
Exactly.
And it makes sense though, like because Patty, like who wants to sit in the discomfort of all of the things, right?
Absolutely.
And it takes like anyway, for me, I think maybe I'm a sometimes slowly kind of girl, but it's taken me a lot of years or decades to like be comfortable with the discomforts of life. Now, I'm not sitting around here being like, "Oh, I love it when things are bad." But like
Right.
I have had many times where I've literally sat like here in this office and I've just kind of cried my eyes out,
Yeah.
or I've just given myself a space where for a day or a week, particularly like at the end of the year when I'm reflecting on things or what something was really going on, the COVID times for us, where I just was like not well,
Yeah.
but I was able to like just sit in that and like be ugly crying and kind of like accept that, and also give myself a lot of grace in that. Like I was able to say like, "Oh,
Yes.
these are my core values. These are the things that I do every day that I'm not going to deviate from, but you know what? They might not look the same as they
Yep.
did when I'm really well. Like when I go to the gym, it might look like, I'm going to stand on the treadmill and put it on like 3.0 and just walk really slow for 30 minutes versus like any other thing dramatic because that's all I have today.
Right. Right.
So
Exactly.
that's the point. Don't you think? Like just showing up however we can, give ourselves grace, feel
Yep.
those feelings, allow yourself to cry, scream, express it, go for a run, whatever you need to do, and
Absolutely.
engage
To
your community.
feel it and let it come out. And for
Yes.
me, something that is vital, and it's been vital in my recovery all along, and I share this with lots of women that I've worked with, is I need a creative outlet. It doesn't matter what it is, but I need a creative outlet. For me, that's journaling. I'm a writer. And I owe any of my sponsees and anybody that I've worked with in workshops, I say, get a journal first thing. And even if you don't know what to write, I don't know what to write, and even just scratch on paper until you're letting whatever is sitting like a lump inside and let it out. We want to externalize that internal thing and, dance. No one has to be there. No one has to see you. Move, do something, go
Mhm.
out and garden, pick up something and sketch. No one's going to see it. It's not to sell. Get that out, because when we're in that creative process, we are connecting with that higher self. We are getting out of our little tiny brain. We are moving into something bigger. And so, creativity, in my opinion, is massive. It's a huge piece and a great tool for exploring, what's under this, what's on top, what's under it, what's going on. Why am I in this place where I know being clean and sober is the best thing for me. Why am I feeling like I want to crawl out of my skin?
Yeah.
And I find that therapy and creativity are the two tools that are essential.
I love that. Yeah, and I think that creativity is it's such an underutilized
Mm,
skill, and also I don't know that we talk about it enough, and also just the variety of ways that can show up. I don't view myself as a creative in general. Like I'm not an artist. I don't really care for journaling that much, although I will do it occasionally at different times in my life. But I used to love like scrapbooking. Like I loved doing that. It was so fun. I would like, and I wasn't, no, like it wasn't magical. I would like get books and kind of follow, but and also like, and I love over the last few years, I love doing like DIY products like essential oil stuff. Like I make lip balm and bath bombs and like essential oil rollers. So like for me, that's creative. Like you
yeah,
could like maybe you
absolutely.
like cooking, or you like growing plants, like so it doesn't have to be art. Like so when we say creative,
Exactly.
it's like so many methods. And it even could be like a thinking creative, like it could be a strategizing. Like maybe you love to just brainstorm. Maybe you like to get together with other people and talk about the world, or like a business issue or something, and like you're like a high level strategic planner kind of type, and that's your creativity genius, right? And so I would just encourage everybody listening to really embrace that about yourself. What is it for you that where that plays out, and it can look a lot of ways versus just drawing and painting. um
Absolutely. Creativity is not artistry. You
right,
don't have to be an artist.
right.
Creating basically is hooking into that higher self, into that soup, into that source, and letting it flow through you, whatever that looks like. And it can be, as you said, it can be anything. It can be movement. It can be gardening, cooking, as you said. It doesn't have to be drawing or making something pretty. And in workshops, when we talked about journaling, it was basically scratch, get something out of you so that it's letting it out. And I love the book The Artist's Way, and
Mm,
Julia Cameron, who's in recovery as well, just talks about the artist's way isn't about being an artist, it's about moving into a creative space, because that's where our power is. That's where we're hooking with our higher self. That's where we are really in that flow. And I think that doing anything creative, anything at all, is the best way to get into that flow state.
yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's really fun when we can explore what that looks like for us in this new stage, because maybe you had a different way before,
Absolutely.
or you thought you liked this thing, like you thought you really loved cooking, and then you're like, actually, I just don't like this at all. I'm only doing it
Yeah.
because I thought I was
Right.
supposed to
Yeah.
do, or
That's
someone told
right.
me I had to do it. And so now in this stage, you get to like consider that. You get to really dig deep and be like, what did I like to do when I was a kid? How did I like to play? Was it with like building blocks or art stuff, or did I like tiny, like toys, like little miniature things, and just check in with yourself. Like, how can that play
Exactly.
out in the adult world? And there's always a way. Um,
Exactly.
so I really appreciate your wisdom here. And I think that this conversation is so powerful, particularly around kind of monitoring our own emotional management. And then specifically around just paying attention and watching out for those signs of relapse, and whether or
Mm,
not like you're actually going to pick up a substance or not, or you're like me, where you're kind of like, I'm not going to do that, but you're still going to be not well and
mm,
acting as if you were like an active addiction, or choosing another thing like food, or maybe it's sex or shopping or something else. There's a lot of ways to get that dopamine hit, scrolling,
yep.
and so
Scrolling. Yeah. God,
yeah,
that
just
for all of
checking
us.
in with that and
Absolutely.
seeing like what's going on with me right now. Like, what am I trying to escape from? Those are great questions to be asking yourself. And you really have to dig deep. Like, you need to ask it and like be real honest. Like, I don't really want to deal with that conflict. I know I'm supposed to call my mom, but I don't want to. Like, what are we
Yep.
trying to escape from? Because let's face it, all of us are trying to do that most of the time. And
Yeah.
it's not always all
Absolutely.
bad, like sometimes we can escape and it's a good way, it's a recharge way. It's a, hey, I'm just going to go veg out and reset.
Right.
So I appreciate this conversation so much and your expertise. And I would love for you to just share where you like people to get a hold of you and reach you if they want to reach out.
Thanks so much, Shelby. Um, my new book, Recovery Road Trip: Finding Purpose and Connection on the Journey Home, is out now. It just dropped on the 1st of October.
Mhm.
And that's available through Simon and Schuster, or on Amazon, or in on books, or hopefully in any of your beautiful independent bookstores, because that's where I love to send people first,
Yeah.
if at all
Yeah.
possible. Support your bookstore.
Right.
Um, my website is patticlark.org,
Okay.
patticlark.org. And I have a YouTube channel that has meditations and visualizations. Visualization has been a huge, huge part of my recovery journey. And yeah,
Thank you so much. I'll make sure that I link to that website below, and
awesome.
your books and all. And I really appreciate that. I encourage everybody to and to go check out Patty's website, check out her books, and read them, because there's a lot of wisdom in that. And especially anybody who takes the time to do all of these interviews and talking to other people who are similar to us, we can get so much wisdom and so much insight when we pay attention to other people's stories. We usually will
Yeah,
find ourselves in those stories somewhere. And then it makes us feel even more connected. It makes us feel more in
absolutely.
community. So thanks again for your time and for your talent. And I hope our paths cross again soon. And I hope